We're recording this meeting, so that's okay with everyone. And I've been working in the sort of international development sector for quite a long time, about 25 years. Um, and I've been thinking alongside lots of you about the kind of changes that we need to protect the people of the planet. And one of the things that has been increasingly happening now is sort of a new impetus around structural economic change. So today we are going to talk a little bit about some of the new economic thinking that's emerging around the world. We will talk a bit about Doughnut Economics, and we're delighted to have colleagues from the Doughnut Economics Action Lab with us today, which is one model of this kind of new economic thinking field, if you like. And then we will talk a bit about what does that mean for development organizations. A lot of this thinking actually has emerged from the global south or from development organizations. And the idea is to have a bit of a discussion, some early thinking about the implications for our work. What does this mean for our work in our programming? What does this mean for what we're saying about change and justice and economics? What does it mean for our advocacy work, our political work? How should we be factoring some of this new emerging thinking into what we do? So very much an introductory session to sort of get people thinking about some of these issues and an opportunity to sort of start that conversation about what we should be doing differently, if anything, as a result of it. So it'd be really great if you could just introduce yourselves in the chat, perhaps just say who you are, what organization you work for, and whereabouts in the world you are. Because I think we've got quite, I can't see how many people we've got on the call, but I think it's quite a lot. And so we won't have time to sort of introduce each other now, but we will do some breakout groups later on where you will get to talk face to face with colleagues from different parts of the world. So we're still gathering people, but that's the general kind of introduction. In terms of why this is important, as most of you know, we've been thinking about what keeps people poor, how we can develop poorer countries for many years. And all of us know that effectively the sort of net outflows of resources are from poor to rich countries, not the other way around. We know that the finance and trade rules are largely rigged against low income countries. We know that inequality is on the rise, and even where there's decent economic growth, and so effectively the sort of system is failing people and it's failing the planet. Now we've known this for decades probably, and many of you will have been working on issues around economic justice for many years. But despite some progress in some areas around debt, for example, we haven't managed to sort of change the overall system. And so the changes that we have succeeded in making are sort of small compared to the overall changes that are required if we are serious about a sort of fairer global economy. So yeah, what's been happening recently, I suppose, over the last 5, maybe 10 years, is that the sort of the inadequacies, if you like, of the global economic system have become more apparent. You know, you've had financial crashes, COVID, climate change is bringing this all to the fore. And so some of the sort of thinking that we've been doing about sort of changes to the sort of global economic structures that are required have suddenly moved. The sort of the Overton window has shifted. So that was a sort of a space that was mainly for the left of politics and wasn't really cutting through in the mainstream. But suddenly you have, you know, businesses and presidents and prime ministers engaging with this kind of new economic thinking and starting to think, well, what is a fairer economy? What does it look like? What does a reformed business look like? What does a sort of capitalism 2.0 look like? So this conversation is suddenly in the mainstream, and there's loads of really exciting thinking about that. And it's much more in the mainstream than it used to be. And so it's not a few people who are sort of pigeonholed as being on the left of politics who are the ones talking about this. This is lots of different people all over the world talking about the same kind of things. So this is the sort of new economics. It's not a single thing. It's loads of people doing loads of different things. It's a very diverse field, and lots of people working on lots of different aspects of it. So some people working on the care economy, some people thinking about reforming businesses, some people thinking about tax justice, some people thinking about climate change. But I think what they generally share is a sense that the sort of we have to be focusing not just on those issues singularly, but on changing the sort of global economic system fundamentally if we're actually going to achieve change in any of those things. So that's some of the different things that people are working on. And I suppose what's a bit different about the new economic field is that it's the sort of it's different to sort of neoclassical approaches to economics in that, which basically assumes that markets are, godlike and efficient, and at the center is a man, and he's very economically rational, and he makes economic rational choices. And new economics is much more subtle, and it talks about the influence of power. It talks about capitalism, imperialism, patriarchy. It takes into account social factors, behavior factors, environmental factors. So it's kind of much more nuanced approach to economics. And so without saying much more, what I'll do is I'll talk a little bit about, well, I'll pass over to my colleagues really, because one of the sort of models, if you like, that has emerged over the last few years is the Doughnut Economics model. And that emerged from Kate Rayworth and other colleagues at Oxfam, I guess a decade ago. And that is one model, not the only one, but one model that might have particular relevance for the development sector and international NGOs, because it frames quite nicely some of the challenges that we face, and it grew out of some of the thinking from the development sector. So I think without further ado, I will pass over to my colleagues from the Doughnut Economics Action Lab to talk a bit more about that model. And then we'll come back together after 20 minutes or so, and then we'll talk a little bit about what some of the implications for the development sector might be. And that will be a conversation. No one has all the answers yet, but there are lots of exciting bits of thinking out there. The Doughnut Economics people can talk a bit about the work they've been doing with businesses to move them along the track. And it might be time that us as NGOs, the development sector, also started to think about what we need to be doing differently going forwards. So with that said, I will pass over to Erinch.
Thank you, Simon. Wonderful to see you all. It feels a bit like a homecoming for me because I worked for so long in the international development sector. Actually, when Kate Rayworth came up with the Doughnut at Oxfam, both Simon and I were colleagues at the time, and we were looking at new models, new ideas. So this conversation has been a part of my background for a while. I also was at the Australian Agency for International Development for a while and worked in fair trade. So development and the considerations of international poverty and inequality are so intertwined with the core of our work, and so many of us working across the Doughnut Economics community of practice. So I'm going to go through a bit of an introduction to DEAL itself and the concept of the Doughnut and Doughnut Economics. And then we're going to go theme by theme. And I'm joined here by some really esteemed colleagues. It's very rare for us to be all together. So I think we're all feeling a little bit giddy about all of this. I'm certainly feeling a little bit exposed to be presenting in front of my colleagues, things that, we normally do in our own spaces, in our own themes. But we're going to go through business, which is me. And then we'll go through cities and regions, which is my colleague, Leonora. And then we'll go through education, which is Carolina. And after cities, we'll go through Rob, which is communities, and then we'll go to education, Carolina, and then research and data, which is Andrew. So you can see us all, we're all branded and ready to sort of present our own themes, and we're going to try to run through this as quickly as possible. So allow me to share my screen as I try to run through the key aspects of what the Doughnut is, what Doughnut Economics Action Lab is, and what some of the core concepts are. So firstly, a bit of a map of this community that's emerged around Doughnut Economics. If you go to doughnut-economics.org, you can look at the communities drop down and view the different aspects and components of this community. The reason I show you this is that it's broad, it's also deep in many places, and it's multidimensional. There are people engaging with these ideas to put them into action. And we, as Doughnut Economics Action Lab, are working to create tools and resources, working to curate communities, support people and organizations to innovate, to drive different kinds of action across different themes, different sectoral spaces. And we're a very slim and small team. So there's only one of us that works on cities and regions. That's Leonora. There's only one of us that works on business and enterprise. That's me, etc. So we've got individuals who are trying to support communities of practice that are emerging around specific themes to drive the kind of action that we want to see happen. And some of the tools that are coming out from the Doughnut Economics Action Lab and beyond, the broader community of practice, are all on our website. So most of the materials you're about to see today are drawn from different tools, different resources that you can find on doughuteconomics.org. One particular component of that community of practice I want to highlight are these organizations in action that are working with different kind of clients, members, organizations to bring Doughnut Economics into their work. We have a short registration process for doing that. There are international NGOs like Oxfam Novib is there, Impact Hubs Global is there, others that are already embodying this work, using these tools and contributing to this community of practice that I mentioned. But there's a short process for registering to use these tools in this way. And these organizations are now sort of spread around the world. So you can go to our organizations in action page and see where they are and how they're operating. So with that said, let's step back and remind ourselves about why we are here. We're here to talk about, in essence, the donuts and what flows from that, which is composed of two critical boundaries. One is the ecological boundary that has been set by Earth system scientists that tell us these are the planetary boundaries we must not overshoot, we must not transgress. And the other is that inner space, that inner boundary, the social foundation, which tells us that these are the essentials of life that we must not fall short on. And it's between these two boundaries lays that green space, the safe and just space for humanity. Now, this has become a compelling diagram for so many because it encapsulates so many of the goals that we want to achieve. And it's spurred all kinds of action from around the world. However, when we step back and think, how are we doing? What we find is that we're not doing very well. We are both in overshoot on the majority of the planet's boundaries and falling short on life's essentials for, as you all know, hundreds of millions of people around the world. This is a situation that needs to be reversed. Now, when we think about how this all fits in and where we can catalyze action, essentially what Kate Rayworth's book does is it tells us if the goal is to get into the donut, then there are 7 ways we need to think like a 21st century economist to help all of us to get in there. And that includes a whole host of principles. So changing the goal, seeing the bigger picture, nurturing human nature, getting savvy with systems, designing to distribute, creating to regenerate, and being agnostic about growth. These 7 ways are central to everything that we do and ways that these ideas get applied in practice. I mean, having been in the development sector for over a decade, none of these are particularly new or particularly novel. I think, working with systems, nurturing human nature, designing to distribute, being regenerative by design, these are all the kinds of goals and ambitions that live and are breathed by everybody in this sector in so many ways. But what we try to do is support this perspective and support various activities around the world. So if we think about what's driving the kind of goals that we want to achieve and what's holding us back, one is this degenerative model of take, make, use, lose, where we take from Earth its resources, we make stuff, we use stuff, and we lose stuff when we repeat this over and over again. And a central pillar of our work is to help turn this dynamic away from being degenerative by design to becoming regenerative by design, working with and within the cycles of the living world. Many of you will recognize that diagram on the right as being a simplified version of the circular economy diagram that tells us we need to create biological material loops that regenerate and technical material loops that restore in an effort to reduce and eventually eliminate the waste of energy and the waste of matter and materials. So how does this look in practice? I mean, the journey is a long one, but also we're starting to see some really innovative ideas. And many of these ideas that we're starting to see now become a little bit more mainstream, a little bit more embedded in economic thinking and practice, actually have been around for decades, for generations. Becoming regenerative by design is something that many indigenous communities and communities around the world have really implemented in various guises. But the journey really takes us from this degenerative model where, for instance, we are degrading landscapes. It takes us along a sustainability perspective, and particularly the current models of corporate sustainability in the way that they are implemented, because we're aware the original definition of sustainable development is actually quite an effective one. But sustainability has become mostly about minimizing, reducing harm, and eventually getting to zero harm. But we need to actually restore and correct some of the damage we've done, which is we're getting to regenerative and working with and within the cycles of the living world means. The second way of maybe looking at this as an example is thinking about the way we've designed our products. We've designed them to have built-in obsolescence. And there are efforts to turn that into recyclable products where we're not having to change our consumption patterns or the product designs, but we're adding a technical solution that reduces the harms by having recyclability. But what if we went further and said, let's have products that are designed to be repairable and are modular in their design. We can design out waste, we can design out the ecological harms that we are seeing happen. And this is happening, for instance, in the business world in lots of different ways, from modular products to decentralized renewable energy systems, such as in Selco in India, to circular fashion models like Houdini, to examples like Sanergy toilets in Kenya, Nairobi, which are using the waste from affordable, accessible toilets that are provided in order to treat that waste, sanitize it, and put it back into agricultural use. But of course, it's not just about the ecologically regenerative, it's also the social side, the socially distributive, and we need to move beyond this inequality that's been spiraling across the world in many ways, in many forms, particularly wealth inequality, but income inequality as well. And we need to move towards sharing opportunity and value with all who co-create it. Now, what does that look like? Well, I know, as many of you know, achieving a living wage is really difficult. It's a goal that has been elusive for so many sectors. I've spent the majority of my career trying to have initiatives that drive a living wage and get to a living wage in global supply chains, and it's tough. It's stuck. But what we're saying is, well, we do want to move to a living wage, but actually, what if we designed businesses and everything else in economic models so that we can share the upside of the economic output and the economic success? Examples like employee ownership, for instance. Another way of thinking about designing to distribute is thinking about what are we including in broken systems. So if we think about transport and we have traffic jams, well, we can simply throw into those traffic jams buses and public transport, which get stuck. But what if we redesigned to actually enable and unlock the kind of dedicated public transit that we might want to start seeing? So a lot of it is about how do we change the system rather than throw in technical solutions into an already broken system. And examples, again, across the business world are plentiful, from worker-owned models such as creative handicrafts in Mumbai in India to other forms of employee ownership that are spawning around the world, to Airbnb and other platform cooperative models that are sharing revenue and voice and power much more equitably with local communities, to examples like Lush and other companies that are taking on the fair tax mark and also turning themselves into hybrid models of ownership where it's part family owned, part employee owned. So we're starting to see innovation. None of these examples are perfect by any stretch, but what they demonstrate is that something else is possible, and there's something interesting going on in the way we design companies and other aspects of our economies that can lead to very different outcomes. Now, I'm sort of moving into the bit introducing you to what all this means for the business world, but I just want to sort of acknowledge that I'm aware that in the international NGO sector and broader civil society, there are so many different levers that are used to try to transform the world of business. Exerting public pressure is so critical, whether it's collective action by farmers, workers, communities, or regulatory reforms that can level the playing field for companies that are trying to do more. to driving enlightened leadership. There, for instance, Anita Roddick, the initiator and founder of The Body Shop, and others that have demonstrated, look, you can drive some change through some enlightened leadership. To setting targets, we know there are really useful initiatives that are setting much better targets and impact measurement approaches, to making the business case more effectively, saying that, look, if we want to belong to an economy of the future and retain a social license to operate, we're going to need to make these transformations and transitions immediately. But what we say as Doughnut Economics Action Lab is that to reinforce all of these and to drive further ambition, Doughnut Economics focuses on transforming the deep design of business. And here's why we do this. Recently, a whole bunch of new regulatory reforms came into the EU, including on due diligence, including on corporate reporting. And there was intense lobbying to water these down, to reduce their applicability and to reduce their impact on the corporate world. But if we designed companies to lean into those same goals, that they were incentivized to pursue the same social and ecological goals that the regulatory reforms are doing, you would come up with much more effective regulations, and they would be implemented more effectively as well. If you had companies that were designed in that way, they would unlock opportunities for enlightened leaders. They would also lean into the target setting and the impact metric calculations, where they would follow that with real action. We saw just recently 239 companies get relegated from the Science-Based Targets Initiative because they'd set amazing and ambitious targets, but were not following that up with the required actions needed. To unlock action, we're going to need to redesign companies. And lastly, if we redesign companies, we also end up with businesses that aren't just about the financial outcomes in making the business case, but much broader outcomes as well. So the invitation and the way Doughnut Economics gets applied and used in the world of business is to get to the deep design of business. So they're going to lean into regulatory reform. They're going to support collective action by workers, farmers, etc. They're going to unlock enlightened leadership and unlock the action necessary behind the target setting that's happening, and make the kind of business case that goes far beyond narrow conceptions of financial value. And how does this work? Well, we look at the deep design of a business through its purpose, its networks, its governance, its ownership and finance. This is a framework that we drew from the amazing work of Marjorie Kelly, who's from the Democracy Collaborative and has written extensively on enterprise design. And essentially, we use that framework to ask ourselves, how do we move away from the outdated 20th century design of companies that are causing degenerative and divisive outcomes, which ask how much value can we extract through this enterprise, to moving towards a regenerative model, which asks how many benefits can we generate through this enterprise. I'm not going to go through each of them, but to give you sort of a snapshot, there is a huge range of companies from around the world, including community-owned renewable energy, including examples of profit-sharing models with farmers and workers, such as Cafe Direct or Equal Exchange, such as other examples of artisan or employee or farmer-owned models like Manos or Uruguay, or examples like Einhorn that are putting forward steward ownership structures that make sure that the ownership model is aligned with the purpose so that they cannot just extract the profits out of the company, or examples of multi-stakeholder governance like River Simple or El Puente in Germany, and many, many others. So we're starting to see these innovations, many of them actually from across the cooperative movement, from the social enterprise movement, steward ownership movement, employee ownership movement. They've existed for decades, but we're seeing a real ramping up of new models of innovation that are now happening. So to finish off, the way that the Doughnut and Doughnut Economics works in the business world is essentially through a tool that we've created that takes businesses and anybody engaged in business. This might be investors, this may be trade unions, this may be local organizations that are engaging with companies, entrepreneurs, farmer organizations, and ask them two questions. One is, how does the design of your business block transformative action? And secondly, how could a redesign of your business unlock transformative action? We've now had thousands of organizations or thousands of applications of this journey around the world to come up with new models of enterprise design, very bespoke models. I can imagine that this could be helpful in enterprise development programs, in livelihoods programs. Could also be useful in various governance programs and advocacy and campaigning, where we're asking for, across the world, across civil society and beyond, a transformation in the way that business is governed, the business is regulated, and the incentives behind the regulatory environment that is setting up one kind of enterprise design versus other kinds of enterprise design. So things like public procurement, tax policy could be levers for change to transform businesses so that we get to that right-hand side of how the redesign of business can unlock transformative action. I'm going to stop sharing here and pass over to my colleague Leonora and ask her to share. Leonora works with cities and organizations that engage with cities around the world, has got great tools on the website as well. So if you go to themes and cities, you can see all of this. But Leonora, over to you.
Thanks, Aaron. I'll just very briefly glimpse through how did this concept translate or resonate in the world of local governments. So there's been a lot of interest in the world of local and regional governments for the ideas, concepts, and tools of doughnut economics. Now, over 80 from around the world have started exploring them in some way. Around 40 have officially and formally introduced them in various policies and processes in their councils. But what does it mean ultimately for local governments to aim for the doughnut and to engage with doughnut economics? And in its simplest and deepest sense, it means to make this commitment to start moving your place towards that safe and just space of the doughnut, to use the doughnut as a compass, kind of setting the long-term goal of the direction in which your place, your local government, and your city, region, village should be moving towards. However, the reality of local governments is quite complex. They're all operating within different national and local legislations, limitations, budget cycles, policy cycles, financial constraints, collaborative partnerships, and various uncertainties and disruptions. So it's very hard to be setting out a generic and kind of replicable pathway for each to be engaging with doughnut economics. So really, each has been quite different in their journey and in their engagement. And we at Deal have been very open and flexible, allowing for this adaptability of the concepts to different places and concepts. And what we have seen emerge based on a lot of the tools that we've created and a lot of the innovation that has come from local governments is various ways to get started and then pathways to move forward in the local government world. We're kind of setting them out in this guide that you can reach on our website called Nice Ways to Get Started, when we're seeing different ways to be starting the engagement with the concepts. And for each local government, the beginning has been different, sometimes starting small, sometimes very big with a big political commitment, sometimes with small little steps, sometimes with many little experiments at once. And I'll just glimpse through some of the things of how these have looked in practice. For many, it has been about starting new conversations and internal learning within the council staff and leaders, and with external partners. So talking about the economy, the city, the future in new ways, crossing across silos, having this interdepartmental conversations in a holistic way in new ways. For many, it has been about using this data methodology that we have to create a donut, an image of your own place, showing you how well you're currently doing towards moving in that safe and just space. And for many, it has been then about using that this conversation and that image of a place to be setting doughnut economics and the ideas of doughnut economics as a strategic compass, kind of tracing a transition path of where we currently are and how we want to be changing that pathway forward, thinking about potential scenarios moving forward as they did in Mexico City, of how you could go how you could turn this image around, or how you could end up if you continue with business as usual. What are the actions, initiatives, priorities we need to set forward, looking at how we're currently doing as a place, and then tackling those areas where we're doing most poorly, creating cross-sectoral initiatives, prioritizing budgets so that we address those biggest red wedges, etc. So these have been kind of just a very small glimpse through some of the case studies, and there are very many, from kind of demonstrator projects, building projects on the ground, through decision-making tools, to developing specific sectoral strategies, whether it's in circularity, whether it's in climate. And you can see a lot of those in that cities guide, a lot of these case studies and possibilities. But just to wrap up a small kind of summary of what are some of the core motivations that change makers in the local government sector engage with the donut. from what we have been learning so far. Often it's about these ideas offering a way for bringing new types of conversations to talk about the crisis, to talk about the new transformative agenda that we need, to talk about where we are as humanity and where we need to be moving, to talk about the economy. For many, the big draw is the holistic framework of the donut to cross between the social and ecological sectors, between internal and external stakeholders, between citizens and businesses and the public sector. For many, the draw is the strong visualization that helps kind of unite a lot of complexity, communicate complexity, mobilize, build buy-in, politically build buying amongst different stakeholders. It's about new ways to measure progress and measure the impact of decisions. It's about holistic ways of tackling the climate and social crisis. And then for many, it's about bringing this new narrative of hope. So talking about the big changes we need, but through a narrative of hope and possibility where everybody can have a role and it resonates with many. So I'll stop here and pass to the next in line, which is my colleague Rob.
Thanks, Leonora. So I have the privilege of working with communities that are engaging with donut economics, and starting with the goal of the donut to meet the needs of all within the means of the living planet. If we're to really do that, we're going to have to tune in with the needs of everyone. The social foundation is the most globally agreed government social goals, but what's it really mean to tune in with everyone's needs? And so how do we have a language that sort of brings that out? And we're going to need the imagination of all to find pathways towards the donut that we can't yet currently see. And we know that many people are intimidated by the word economics, but we've yet to find anyone who's scared of donuts. And there's something about the donut that is playfully powerful, that is finding lots of accessible ways to talk about an inaccessible topic. We recognize that people are picking this open source idea up and playing with it to create lots of creative entry points for conversation, to really ask the questions: what does it mean to you to thrive? What does it mean for our community to thrive? What does it mean for all of nature in our place to thrive? It also offers the Doughnut Economics offers a framework to really reconcile some of the challenges we feel acutely in our communities with the crises we see globally. It also acts as a powerful convening idea to offer a goal for your place that almost is like a beacon to find others and signal to others in your place working towards systemic change. And so whilst we can think about communities at the neighborhood scale, we can also think about communities of people across a city, region, and nation who might see this beacon and wish to connect with others interested in these irresistible goals put forward. And so what we've noticed is the different silos that one might see in an economy where you have these gray dots representing all people. We know there are lots of people who are keen to act, and some might require a little push, many of whom are working brilliantly on initiatives within their own sector. But we also know that there's people who have this additional skill of connecting. And when they begin to see each other through the ideas of the donut, they make visible the work going on in a place. And when connecting, it gives that wider perspective of what you're working towards, and it can recognize the common barriers faced in all of these different areas, so that there's almost a shared collective action towards unlocking those deeper shifts, deeper economic mindsets and shifts that are needed to move towards the space of the donut. Things that would be individually impossible that become collectively feasible. And these groups and networks are popping up all over the world. We've got around 60 now, and I can recognize some faces from people across some of these groups on the call here today. And we had Global Doughnut Day to bring together many of these groups in November last year, and there's going to be another one coming up in November this year. And I'm just going to focus on Mumbai Doughnut Collab that launched recently. Now, their aim is, oh goodness me, I have notes here that I was going to share, but hang on, bear with me just 2 seconds. No, I can't do it. Their aim, it's a long-term collaborative action initiative that uses the donut model and systemic thinking to visualize a better future for Mumbai and to develop and test and implement solutions towards that future, working with citizens, NGOs, governments, startups, media, and businesses to develop and support initiatives at the city, ward, and neighborhood levels. Their objective is to balance the needs of the economy, society, and environment. The method is to increase citizen interest and involvement in Mumbai's future, and the goal is to make Mumbai happier, sustainable, and more prosperous. They have, in 2 days' time, they launched their fellowship program that will bring together leading thinkers to work on the different dimensions across the donut, bringing in researchers and NGOs and think tanks to get information at a city and sub-city level. And then identify the government departments, organizations, NGOs, citizen groups, startups, businesses, media outlets in each dimension to bring everyone together around this data that will then be open sourced and published and made publicly available as a resource for any organization or person interested in a better understanding of Mumbai. But just to leave you with the idea that the word donut is a name that was given actually to the concept of two concentric rings and an idea of balance. But we recognize it can be any name that is culturally relevant to your community and your place. And so we invite you to pick it up and make it yours, make it right for your culture. And I think this adaptability of these ideas to cultural context is one of the main reasons why we're seeing it being picked up in lots of different ways. So I'll leave you with that slide. And now, who am I passing to? Carolina, over to you.
Great. Hi, everybody. So I lead the work in schools and education. I hope that you can see my screen. I have lots of different things here. And I'm really thrilled to be here and to share what the donut means for schools and education. And it's really all about empowering future generations. And I really look forward to building on this theme and our work with you together. So if my screen works, there we go. So everything about the donut is really about how we learn and how we learn by doing. And we have therefore lots of different priorities in this theme that are on the slide. These are really the outcomes of sensing and listening to our schools and education communities around the world. And all of them are important, but we are starting with number one, which is really creating the Doughnut Economics foundational tools that can reach schools and children around the world, particularly between the 5 to 18-year-old age bracket. And at the moment, this is what we're focusing on. And in this priority, our goal is to teach around the world, as I said, and especially in a way that allows for the necessary change that my colleagues have been talking about, and so that we can transition to these thriving futures. But we know already that solving problems in the way that we have been doing and doing more of the same will really not help. And so we really need this deep transformation that we changes our structures and our behaviors and our work. And we need to reach young people in different ways, but also the educators in different ways that empowers them with new ideas and images and facts, but also to see the world differently and to imagine how that futures, the multiple futures could be and look like around the world. So to contribute to this creation, what we're doing is very ambitious because we're thinking about education that thinks in different ways, not only engaging the head, but also engaging hands and the heart and your feet. So this means engaging how you're thinking, but also how you're feeling about things. How can you act? What can you do? What can you make to engage and be proactive in this transformative change that we need? But also with your feet, where are you coming from? What is your cultural context? What are you working with? And where are you working towards? What is that environment asking from you? And so we understand that all of this means very different things around the world. And this means that what we're doing with this vision is that the materials that we're designing at the moment, these foundational core tools, which focus on the introduction to the donut at the moment. Here are some screenshots on the screen of what this prototyping looks like. Need to be adaptive and flexible. And we are hoping that they will make knowledge very available and accessible to everyone. But at the same time, we are aware that the complexities of everything that I've just said means that we can't just streamline things. So the materials that we're designing, the composition of this is composed of different contexts, but also timings and ways of teaching different curriculums and engaging educators in different ways so that they are really suitable for different places around the world. But also to think about educators, not only as the teacher at the side of one room, but also involving young people, people in informal and formal places within the classroom, but also beyond the classroom, and hoping that we can support all these different diversity around the world in this way. So that's it for me. Thank you so much for listening, and I really hope that you will make use of these tools when they are available, hopefully in summer. And I'll pass it on to my colleague, Andrew.
Thank you very much. Wow, this is a whirlwind of the deal team. It's not something we normally do. I'm going to take over the screen if that's okay, Carolina, and just share a few slides from my bit. So I am the research and data analysis lead at Doughnut Economics Action Lab. I wanted to take a step back to the donut because I guess I have two parts to my role that I'm very privileged to have. One is about making visible the concepts of donut economics through data, which is something I'm very passionate about. And then the other one is more about how can we, and like the other members of the team, is how can we create tools for transformative action that are, taking these concepts and putting them into practice. So if we start with this global donut concept, and again, keeping in mind that we're trying to focus more on an international development setting, one of the things that clearly comes out with this global picture is that it's missing some of the context that's relevant when we think about making policies or taking into account why does international development exist at all. And so I have led some research that was looking at taking this global concept and bringing it down to the level of the nation, where a lot of policies and other connections get made. And so this is an image of as many donuts that I can fit on a chart. And really the goal is to be in that upper left corner where we want to be meeting the needs of all people within the means of the living planet. And you can see this illustrated, it's almost like no country is quite making it into the donut. So we have some that are falling far short of meeting the needs of their residents, others who are kind of in this middle ground, but somewhat falling short and somewhat overshooting, and others, primarily the high-income nations of the world, who are doing relatively well in terms of social performance, but just massively overshooting their levels of pressure on the planet. And in all of our work, we try to underscore and emphasize that, of course, nations are not just these separate entities on a chart. We know that they're deeply interconnected through colonialism, through military power, corporate power, through the almost rigged trade and finance rules that many of you are familiar with, about resource extraction by multinational corporations and others, and of course the impacts of climate change, which are felt first and hardest by the most vulnerable, even though they have contributed little or nothing to the overarching climate crisis. So this is some framing of how we can make visible the worldview of the challenge we're facing in the 21st century brought to the national scale. And I think that it's empowering because it starts to provide, pathways that take into account these different trajectories across nations. So if we go with the core dynamics we need, 21st century is for people and planet to thrive. We want regenerative and distributive pathways by design, as mentioned by Aaron. But what does that mean? So if we look at the low-income nations of the world, how can they rise up and into that space of the donut without overshooting their shares of planetary boundaries like every other nation has done before them? How can middle income or emerging economies do almost like a 90-degree shift to reorient their economic systems to get into the donut? Also a pathway that has never been done before. And critically, the high-income nation of the world who like to tell the rest of the world that they are developed, which is a term that we at Doughnut Economics Action Lab have retired, because based on this image, there's nothing developed about overshooting planetary boundaries. So how can they reduce their levels of resource use, in some cases really, really radically, without, you know, losing the gains in social improvement that have been achieved. So these are some of the dynamics across or within countries, but of course we also need to recognize that the international system within which they operate needs rebalancing as well. So it's not just transformative action within countries, but also between them. And I think in international development in particular, this framing is I mean, I would argue the picture that we need to be showing much more than this notion of developed versus developing countries. And I just want to talk a little bit, this is my last slide, showing that other side, which is how can we create tools that researchers and people who are interested in data analysis can pick up and put the ideas of doughnut economics, you know, either dive deeper or put them into practice in their places. And you can go into the platform. There's a few tools, particularly around, I'm trying to compile academic research articles that are engaging directly with doughnut economics, or academic dissertations, which are often more dispersed and hard to find, but that's usually like kind of at the vanguard of work in this area because it's so new. But really the whole literature around doughnut economics is growing very, very, well, it's accelerating rapidly, and there's lots going on. So I'll leave it there because I know that there's other plans for the agenda, and looking forward to the rest. So thanks.